What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. Back with another update on my Mercedes hoopties. Having some fluid issues, if you will, and so I want to try to address some of those today. I have both of these in the garage right now because they're going to both need some work because I have some fluids issues. I mentioned previously that I may be selling the E55, and so I think that I'm going to try to get that kind of prepared for sale, which means going through the car to fix everything I can and punting the rest. One of the things I fixed yesterday was the seat switches on here. So before, in one of my previous videos, I mentioned that the seats switches did not move correctly. Everything moved backwards. I simply swapped in a new one that I had, and now they work. Now, obviously, the difference is that's a different wood pattern than this one. This is a green, bird's eye maple green, I believe is what it's called, and it's sun faded around the car. So I just swapped in a new one. Obviously, they don't match. That's going to be an issue this new owner can take up, but the seats work properly, so that's great. Now, the bigger issue with the E55, and one that I'm not very happy about, is when I was messing around with the seat switches yesterday, I came to the front of the car and I noticed some oil underneath the front. And when I got down, this is what I saw, which is obviously quite a bit of oil. And it looks like it's coming from the front of the car. So when I opened the car up, I could see that, you know, you could see little oil drops and stuff. I look down in here, I can see it's wet down below, particularly down there, and that the belt had some oil in it, and the belt seemed to be getting very oily right over here. So looking around, I did a little bit more research, and they said it's probably the oil cooler gasket. Now, if you guys remember on my previous video when I did the oil filter housing, oil cooler gasket, and the and the valve cover gasket, I replaced this part. And so I thought, well, surely that can't be the case. But sure enough, this morning I started the car and immediately oil was seeping out of here and in these cracks. So these gaskets that I bought from Amazon are bad, and unfortunately we have to do this job again. Now, it's not too difficult a job, but I do have to drain the oil. I've got to take the oil filter housing off, and then I can unscrew these bolts here and then simply replace the gaskets all around. Now, that's a pretty simple job. It sounds very simple, but if you remember from the video, the nut that goes on the oil filter housing is incredibly difficult to thread back on, and that took me a very long amount of time. So not looking forward to doing that job, but I have ordered the new gaskets from Rock Auto and not Amazon, so hopefully that will seal up that leak. But it's very unfortunate that that thing came. Now, I got the Mercedes ML55 AMG back from my buddy's shop. He put on new tires, so I'm gonna show you those real quick. Bridgestone Dueler all-terrains, 285, 60, 18s. Not quite as aggressive I was hoping to get, because I was hoping to get something like, I was hoping to get a BF Goodrich, something like that. So not quite as beefy, but I think they fill out the wheel out pretty good. Best of all, I got rid of that annoying ESP light that's flashing on the dash because the sizes were different, and so the traction control was just all wonky, so that's gone. The car finally drives actually really good. Brakes work good. The front shock's better. I've got an alignment. So overall, the car drives great. Now, another issue popped up. I had planned to do the valve cover gaskets this weekend or sometime pretty soon, and I'm hoping to do those at some point. But when I picked the car up from the shop, the first thing I noticed immediately getting in the car was that the power steering pump was super loud. So if you've ever seen this, you got in your car and you've turned the wheel and it makes a bunch of noise from left to right, that's your power steering pump. A lot of times your power steering fluid is low. And so I drove the car home, checked the power steering fluid. It was pretty low. I did get some Mercedes approved power steering fluid, put that in, and thought I was gonna solve the issue. Well, I drove it today to work, and when I got to work and started the car to come home, same issues. It was very loud and growling. I noticed a ton of fluid on the ground. Also, you can see that the car was parked out here last night when I was filling up. That's on the ground. And then when I got home, I got under the car. Let's see if you can see from here, and you can see some fluid there. Now let's check this other side. Now, my mechanic did tell me that the power steering rack was leaking and that it needed to be addressed, but that it's almost impossible to find one of these racks, and so very costs. I mean, it's probably gonna be $1,000 not including the rack. So what I noticed was leaking. So here's the fluid here on the ground, and so what was leaking is basically right here. You can see it's very wet, and that was dripping. Now, I'm pretty sure that is the power steering rack and pinion leaking on that side. Now, it's not leaking on this side, but a bunch of leaks here. Now, one of the issues on this car, it's pretty common, is a leaky power steering reservoir. there's a filter in there that can get clogged up, and a lot of times these break, and there's an O-ring that attaches to the power steering pump that can also go bad. And so originally I planned to come home and change out the reservoir because I bought one. And in fact, I spent most of the day looking at replacing the power steering pump, but I thought, why don't I change the reservoir first? That's just gonna cost about $40 in parts and liquid and fluids. So we're gonna change that. But when I got home and I saw all of this, what I'm assuming is fluid leaking on the ground, I'm not so sure that's the issue. But let's take a look. So here's our new reservoir for the power steering. And it sits up here like this. There's one bolt that goes in right here on the side. And then on the back is an outlet for the hose. And then this inlet goes in from the power steering pump. There's a C-clamp that sits in there. And the new gasket, which I also have, sits on the actual power steering pump. So I'm gonna attempt to do this. It's gonna get kind of messy because I thought I had a hose to pump out the fluid that's already in there, but I don't. So I'm probably just gonna get super messy and deal with it later after I clean it up. All right guys, so we have our power steering reservoir off. Again, there's one bolt there. This hose comes off here. This inlet you just pull straight out. All right, so we got our O-ring on here. Turns out there was an O-ring on here. It was just stuck inside the housing, which makes sense. But let's go ahead and get this housing back on, the reservoir back on. We got our new reservoir in. Next thing is going to be to fill this thing up with our trusty Mercedes. Well, this isn't Mercedes, but this is what it requires. This power steering fluid. So we'll put that in and come back and get the air bubbles out and start it up. All right guys, well, we've replaced the reservoir for the power steering pump, filled it up with power steering, got all the bubbles out. The power steering is working great, not making any noise, but I mean, this thing is directly leaking from the steering rack. You can see it right there, and it's coming out green just like the fluid went in. So that fluid is going from the power steering pump straight in the steering rack and leaking straight out. So we got a leaky steering rack. That's going to be a big issue, probably a big ticket item, I don't know. So on to the next project. Thanks for watching.